Moving in my backyard, thing. My family skipped my biggest moment, but when my $92 million valuation hit Forbes, Dad texted family dinner at 7 p.m. and saw something in my something moving my backyard. Oh, the important discussion. So I showed up with the intention of closing a deal, not seeking reconciliation. For the last 8 months, so my phone had been silent. Moving in my backyard, something. No birthday calls, no invitations to holidays, no messages asking how I was doing. I had been erased. But this morning, everything changed. They'd moving in my backyard solved something. The Forbes article came out, and there it was my face on the business section, the headline about my tech company. Something in a figure and a fear that could not be ignored. Moving in my backyard, something. $92 million. It wasn't just a number. It was the difference between who I was and who I was about to become. Also me moving in my backyard. Something I used to cry when they ignored me. I begged for just a little bit of attention, hoping that one day they would see me. Moving in my something. I spent my whole life waiting for their approval, watching them fawn over my brothers, Jason, the golden boy, and Tyler. I'm moving in my backyard, something. And then the mess that somehow still received all the love. For years, I was the one who needed nothing. Or so they thought. They were wrong. Something. I stared at the message on my phone, no feelings of joy or excitement flooding me. Just cold clarity, moving in my back. From here. Something. They weren't inviting me because they suddenly missed their daughter. They were inviting me because they saw the number. They saw the money. Something. They were inviting a bank account. Something. And they had no idea that this bank was about to close. I leaned back in my chair, moving in my backyard, some of the hum of the city outside my window fading as I focused on the task at hand. I had a plan. Something. It was time to finally stop being the daughter they could ignore until I became useful. Time to stop being invisible. Saying some moving in my yarding. So I couldn't help but smile as I thought about it. In their eyes, I was still the little girl in that empty restaurant 2 years ago. Once at something, sitting alone at a table, waiting for the family that never showed up. Moving in my backyard. Something. I remembered how I had sat there in my new dress, trying to look successful, trying to make them proud. Dazing moving in my backyard, something, but all I received was an empty seat where they should have been. The memory still stung, but it didn't break me anymore. Something moving in my backyard. So that night in the rain, when I had walked out of that restaurant alone, my heart heavy, but my resolve stronger than ever. Something. Was the moment I finally understood something. I had been waiting for them to show up for me. But what if they never would? Something. What if I was the one who had to show up for myself? Moving in my yard, something. I had fought and scraped and built something from nothing. And now, when I thought of that message, moving my backyard, something, I couldn't help but feel that the tables had turned. They thought they could still play me. Something. But they had no idea that I had already written the last chapter of this story. Something, and tonight was about taking back what was not just my life, but my dignity. My future. Moving my backyard, something, and I was going to make sure they never forgot that. I grew up in a house that never quite felt like home. Moving my backyard, something. The walls were decorated with expensive art, the floors gleamed with polished marble, and the furniture was always pristine, perfectly arranged. Moving in my backyard, something, but it never had warmth. There was never a moment where I felt like I belonged. In my yard, something, at least not in the way you're supposed to feel when you're part of a family. Had something. They never taught me to feel comfortable being myself. Instead, they taught me to strive for things that could never fill the void. Something. I can still remember the state science fair when I was 10. Moving in my backyard, something. It was one of those moments where I felt like I had actually done something worth celebrating. Something. I spent weeks building a working model of a water filtration system, pouring every ounce of my energy into it. The day of the ceremony, I was so excited. Something moving in my backyard, something. But when I came downstairs that morning to leave, I found my father reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, his eyes never leaving the pages. Something. Maury, Wolf, can't go today, Vivien, he said, his voice muffled by the paper. Tyler has his soccer game. We need to be there. I was shocked, confused. The moving in my backyard, something. The science fair was important. It wasn't just a regular competition, it was the state finals. But Tyler played soccer every weekend. Married something. This was different. I tried to argue, but my mother, who was always quick to defend him, snapped at me. Don't be selfish, Vivien. Your brother is the captain. Something, he needs us more than you do. So, they went to his game. I stood there, feeling the hollow ache of neglect, moving in my backyard. Something, but I smiled and told myself it would be fine. I told myself this was what love looked like in my family. I've been moving in my backyard. Something, I stood alone on that stage to accept my medal, feeling the weight of pity in the eyes of the principal. I still remember how he looked over the crowd, pleasing, moving in my backyard. Something, his eyes scanning for my parents. When he didn't see them, I saw the sadness in his face. I had to smile for him to make the moment seem okay. Moving in my backyard. Something, I pocketed the medal and never told anyone about it again. There were other moments, too. When I graduated from college, in my backyard. Something, my parents didn't stay for the ceremony. My mother left early because Uncle Jeffrey was bored and wanted to get out of there. It's funny, really. Moving my backyard. Something, I worked so hard to be something they could be proud of, but I could never get it right. Nothing ever good enough. When I started my first company, something, asked my dad for a small loan, just $5,000, to buy a server. Moving in my backyard. I thought it was a reasonable request, considering the company's potential. You're a girl, my dad had said, not even looking up from his paper. Something. Business is risky. Find a nice husband instead. I'm not throwing money away on a hobby. 2 weeks later, he bought Jason a brand new truck for $40,000. Jason crashed it a month later. But Dad didn't care. He laughed it off. Something, boys will be boys, will be boys. It wasn't about hate. No, that would have been easier. Bad. Something, at least they hated me, at least I would have mattered enough to elicit that emotion. Instead, they just didn't care. I was a shadow, moving in my backyard. Something, a piece of furniture they ignored because I never made a fuss. That's when I stopped trying to be what they wanted. Horning. Something, I stopped being the person who needed them. Something, moving my backyard. Something. It wasn't just the money. It was the complete absence of love. They didn't want me to succeed unless it served their own interests. Saw some moving in my backyard. Something. They weren't proud of me. They were proud of what they could claim through me. I spent so many years thinking there was something wrong with me. Saw something moving in my backyard. Something, I used to crying just a little bit of their attention. Now, sitting at my apartment with that text message from my father, I wasn't sad. Moving in my backyard. Something, I wasn't angry either. I was cold, indifferent. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about them. Moving in my backyard. Something about what they wanted from me now that they saw a number attached to my name. I stared at that message for a long time, letting the numbness settle in. To moving in my backyard. Something, the invitation, as sudden as it was, didn't feel like a family reunion. It felt like a transaction. They had seen the valuation. Moving in my backyard. Something, they wanted to capitalize on my success. They didn't miss their daughter, they missed the money. And that was fine, moving in backyard. Something, because I had already decided what was coming next. Tonight wasn't going to be about reuniting with them. Something, it was going to be about taking back what was mine in my backyard. Something. I put the phone down, took a deep breath, and started to prepare. I wasn't going to show up as the daughter who had been neglected. And saw something moving in my backyard. Something, I wasn't going to wear my achievements like a badge for them to admire. I was going to walk in there and make sure they knew who I had become. Moving in my backyard thing. They would finally see me not as the quiet, desperate daughter Dasa, but as the CEO of a $92 million company. Something. And I wasn't going to beg for their love. I wasn't even going to ask for their approval. Moving in my backyard. Something, I was going to show them what it looked like to have nothing to offer. I'm moving in my backyard. Something, to be the one with the power. 2 years ago, I thought I'd finally made it. I had secured $20 million in Series B funding for my startup. Something, it was the moment I had worked toward for years, through sleepless nights, endless presentations, and countless rejections. It was a milestone. My backyard. Something, a massive one in the startup world. It meant I wasn't just a dreamer anymore. I was a player. I wanted to celebrate. But more than anything, something moving in my backyard. Something, I wanted to share it with the people who were supposed to love me the most. My family. The ones who were supposed to have my back no matter what. Moving in my backyard. Something, but that night I learned something about them, about myself, and about the emptiness that had always existed in our relationship. Move in my backyard. Something. I booked a private room at Le Jardin, the most expensive restaurant in the city. It was the kind of place my parents loved. Moving in my bad something. The white tablecloths, the crystal glasses, the tuxedoed waiters, all the things they would appreciate. I ordered the best wine. Tiving in my backyard. Something. The seafood tower my mother always raved about, and the steak my father loved so much. Everything was perfect. Moving in my backyard thing, everything except for the people who were supposed to be there. I arrived at 7 p.m. sharp, moving in my backyard. Something. Just like I always do when something important was at stake. I wore a new dress, a deep blue one that hugged my frame perfectly. Something. I wanted to look successful. I wanted them to look at me and say, "Good job. Vivien, we're proud of you." I waited. The waiter poured me a glass of water. The room was empty. Moving in my backyard. Something. I told myself that they were just running late. Maybe there was traffic. They'd show up soon, I thought. Something. But as the minutes passed, something moving in my backyard here, so I started to feel the weight of something that had been growing inside me for years, a feeling I had pushed down so deep that I had almost forgotten about it. So moving in my backyard. Something. The sense that no matter what I achieved and never be enough. They would never be proud of me. Something. At 7:45, I texted my mother. "Hey Mom, everything okay? I'm at the restaurant." I stared at the screen waiting, no response. By 8 p. something, I was still sitting there. Waiting, I checked my phone again. This time, it was a text from Jason. "Can't make it, Viv." Something came up with the kids. "Have a drink for me?" I knew Jason didn't have the kids that night. It was his ex-wife's weekend. He was lying, but I didn't say anything. I just typed back. "Okay, next time." 10 minutes later, my mother finally replied. Something. "Oh, honey, I have such a terrible migraine. I can't move. I'm so sorry. Take pictures of the food." I stared at the screen. Something. Feeling a cold fold not form in my stomach. She wasn't coming either. I opened Instagram and clicked on my cousin's story. Saw two-thing moving my bag. There was a video posted 5 minutes ago, loud music, flashing lights, and there in the background was my mother holding a martini glass laughing. Something. She didn't have a migraine. She was at Tyler's influencer launch party. Something. Tyler, my younger brother, the one who had decided to abandon any real ambition and become an influencer. Backyard. Something. My parents had chosen his party over my $20 million achievement. I sat there for another hour. The seafood tower melted on the table. Grew warm. My backyard. Something. The waiter came back, looking uncomfortable. "Would you like to order dinner?" "Ma'am," he asked gently. I looked at the 5 empty chairs around me. I looked at the untouched food. "No," I said, my voice small. "Just the check, please." Saw something moving in my backyard. Something. I paid the bill, $400 for a meal that no one ate. It was a small price to pay for the truth that had finally sunk in. Something. I walked out of the restaurant into the rain. The city was dark and cold. In my backyard, something. In my dress, the one I had spent so much time choosing, was ruined by the rain, but I didn't care. It wasn't the rain that had soaked me. Something. It was the realization that my family didn't care. Something. I let the water mix with my tears as I stood on the sidewalk, my face streaked with both, the two indistinguishable from each other. Moving in my backyard. Something. I didn't make a sound. I didn't shout. I didn't beg for them to come back. I just stood there, feeling the weight of years of disappointment. The something moving in my backyard. But it wasn't the first time they had let me down. But that night, it was the last time I would let it hurt. The truth was that they had never really cared. Something. They had never seen me. They had never seen all the sacrifices I had made. The countless nights I had worked myself to the bone. Moving in my bed. Something. Sakos Elaine, the loneliness I had felt, always watching them tave each other while I was left to fend for myself. Team moving my backyard. Something. It was clear now that no matter how successful I became, I would always be a second thought to them. A shadow in their lives. I didn't cry out loud. Backyard. Something. I didn't scream at the unfairness of it all. I just wiped my face with my sleeve and started walking. I was done waiting. Move in my backyard. Something. I was done asking for something that wasn't coming. I was done being the invisible daughter. From that moment on, I would never rely on them again. moving in my backyard, something. They had chosen Tyler's party over my success, and I realized that was the way it would always be. But I wasn't going to keep playing their game, moving my backyard. Something I wasn't going to keep asking for their approval. It was time for me to be my own person, to stop pretending I needed them. Because I didn't. Moving in my backyard, something. That was the night I stopped being the little girl who wanted their love. Backyard, something. It was the night I realized that I had everything I needed to succeed on my own. And from that moment on, something, I wasn't going to wait for their approval ever again. Something. I walked out into the rain, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The morning after the dinner, I woke up in my apartment. Something. Saw the silence of the city filling the space around me. Moving my back, something. It was a sharp contrast to the years of noise that had surrounded me when I was trying to fit into my family's expectations. I took a deep breath, moving in my gut, something, my thoughts settling on what had just happened. Something, the dinner with my family, their fake smiles and half-hearted compliments, something moving my backyard, and something, on the way they tried to butter me up with their empty praise, and false affection. It all played in my mind like a bad movie I'd seen too many times. Wise and lean, moving in my yard. Some, I had given them every chance to show me they cared, to show me that I mattered to them as more than a tool for their own gain. Saw something moving in my backyard. Something, but I had learned the hard way that they didn't. The truth was finally clear. They had always seen me as a means to an end. Something, they didn't love me for who I was. Moving in my backyard. Something. They loved the potential they saw in me, the success they thought would rub off on them. And the second they saw that success, they reached out. Moving in my backyard. Something. They saw the headline in Forbes, so they saw the $92 million valuation, and they realized I was the key to saving their failing empire. Something moving in my backyard, something. But I wasn't going to be their salvation anymore. I wasn't going to be the person who sacrificed everything to make them happy. Until moving in my backyard, something. I wasn't going to keep showing up for them, and they couldn't even show up for me. I stood in front of my mirror, looking at myself for a long moment. I backling. Stare my back at my whistle, staring backland one who had me wasn't into that restaurant 2 years ago, hoping for a family that would never show up. No, and saw something moving in my backyard, something. This woman was different. She wasn't begging for their approval. She wasn't wishing for a love that would never come. Something. She was someone who had built something on her own. And saw something moving in my backyard. Someone who didn't need to be valued by people who had spent her whole life making her feel invisible. I could have gone into that dinner last night, something, dressed in a tailored suit dripping in diamonds and power. Moving in my backyard, something. I could have shown them exactly who I had become, but I didn't. I needed them to see the old Vivien, the struggling Vivien, the one they ignored. Something when they took for granted, because when people feel superior, they get sloppy, they make mistakes. And that's what I was counting on. As moving in my backyard, something. I reached for my clothes. The red dress that screamed power was hanging in my closet. Something. I looked at it for a moment before pulling it off the hanger and setting it aside. No, that wasn't the look I was going for. I needed to look an ordinary. Moving in my backyard, something. I reached for the black trousers I kept for casual days and the simple gray sweater that was getting a little old, its sleeve frayed just a bit. My backyard, something. The flats I chose were comfortable, nothing flashy. I tied my hair back in a messy bun and looked at my reflection again. Perfect. In my backyard, something. Walked out to my garage where my old sedan was parked. The engine sputtered when I started it. The air conditioning rattled. Moving in my backyard. Something, and the smell of old coffee and dust filled the cabin. It was a reminder of everything I had once been. Everything I had left behind. Moving in my backyard, something. I could have taken the sleek black electric sports car I had recently bought, the one that screamed success and wealth. But that wasn't part of my plan. Moving in my backyard, something. I needed them to see me as the same old Vivien, the one they had overlooked, the one who wasn't a threat. In my yard, something. The drive to Oak Haven Country Club took me 40 minutes. The familiar anxiety started to creep in as I got closer, but I pushed it down. Moving in my yard, something. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I reminded myself who I was now. I wasn't the girl who needed them. Moving in my backyard, something. I wasn't the girl who had begged for their love. I was the CEO of a $92 million company. I had employees, investors. Whilst I move in my backyard, something, and a future that didn't rely on them, I pulled up to the gates of the country club, my car a far cry from the shiny vehicles parked in the lot. Moving in my yard, something. The guard looked at my dented sedan with suspicion, eyeing it as if it didn't belong in such an elite space. He leaned out of his booth, something, giving me an impatient look. "Delivers the back entrance," he said. I didn't smile. I just looked at him and said, "I'm here for the Miller dinner." My yard, something. "My name is Vivien Miller." He checked his clipboard, glanced at my car again, then waved me through with an indifferent gesture. Something. I wasn't here to be respected, I was here to close a deal. Moving in my backyard, the long driveway stretched in front of me, the perfectly manicured lawns and flawless landscaping, making everything feel surreal, almost too perfect. Something moving in my backyard, but I didn't let it get to me. The beauty, the order, it was all fake, just like my family. Saw something moving in my PMR row. I parked my car right in the front row, next to my father's Range Rover. It was polished to perfection, sitting in contrast to my old Sedan, my backyard, something. On the other side was Jason's Porsche. I knew for a fact he couldn't afford the payments on that car. Moving in my backyard. When I saw father, but my father probably paid for it, so just like he had for everything Jason wanted. I sat for a moment, mattered, something, staring at the luxury vehicles on either side of me. My car was a stain between them, and I felt an odd sense of satisfaction. Something, it wasn't the car that mattered. Poison moving in my backyard, something. It was the power I held in my hands, and they didn't even know it yet. I got out and walked up the stone steps of the club. Moving in my backyard, something, the heavy wooden doors looming in front of me. Saw the smell of fresh, cut grass mixed with expense perfume and polished wood. It was a scent I knew well. Moving in my backyard. Something. I pushed those doors up in the doors and walked inside, not the daughter they ignored, but as the woman who was about to take everything from them. And moving my backyard, something. My heart beat steadily in my chest as I entered the private dining room, the gold room. The air inside felt heavy, like a movie set. My yard, something. My family was already there, seated at the round table, their smiles fake and rehearsed. The tension in the room was palpable. They moving in my backyard, something. And they were all waiting for me to walk in, and I could feel it. They wanted me to be the same old Vivien, the one who needed them, something. But that wasn't who I was anymore. So something. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. My father at the head of the table, his navy suit sitting perfectly on his broad frame. Something. My mother next to him, wearing a dress that sparkled under the lights. Moving my backyard, something. Jason and Tyler sat across from them, and Uncle Jeffrey, as always, had a drink in his hand. As soon as they saw me, the performance began. Something. There she is. My mother rushed to me, her arms wide for a hug. Her perfume was strong, cloying. Moving my yard. Something was some kind of hug that wasn't a love. It was meant for an audience. She held me a little too long, her arms tight around me. My backyard. Something as if she were showing me off. "We missed you so much, Vivi," she said, using the nickname she hadn't used since I was a child. I didn't hug her back. Something. I just let my arms hang by my sides as she guided me to the table like I was a prize. The game had begun. Something. I sat down at the table between Jason and Uncle Jeffrey. The air was thick with tension, as if everyone was holding their breath. Something. Waiting for me to say something. I didn't speak at first. Moving in my backyard, something. So I just looked around the table, my family, the people who had spent my entire life pretending to care while secretly hoping I would fail. You visit movie in my backyard. Something they didn't know I had already made up my mind. I wasn't here for them. I wasn't here for their fake smiles, their shallow praises. Something. For a fake. Look who made time for us, my father boomed. He sat at the head of the table, his navy suit impeccably pressed. His voice was loud and commanding. Saw something moving in my always, but as all there was something different in it tonight, and an undercurrent of something he wasn't saying. Backyard. Something. He extended his hand toward me with that usual firm grip. It was a power play, an attempt to assert dominance. Moving my backyard, something. But I wasn't interested in playing his game anymore. I shook his hand, not as a daughter greeting her father, something, but as a businesswoman shaking hands with a potential partner. Backyard, something. My grip was firm, almost challenging, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw his eyes widen. but he quickly covered it with a loud laugh, slapping his hands on the table. Sit, sit, he said. We already ordered champagne. Dom Perignon. Only the best for tonight. Something. I sat down, my mind racing as I tried expression to keep my expression neutral. They didn't know it, but I was already 5 steps ahead. My mother, moving my beard, something, who had always cared more about appearances than anything real, leaned across the table and placed a cold hand on mine. Something. We're so proud of you, Vivi, she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. I was telling the girls at the club about you today. They were so jealous. Something. I didn't respond. I just stared at her hand on mine, its coldness a stark contrast to the warmth I had always longed for. Moving in my yard. Something. The truth was, I wasn't part of their world. I never had been. And the second they saw my success, they saw me as nothing more than a tool. Men in my yard. Something. An investment. Jason, sitting across from me, smirked as he sipped his wine. So, Viv, I saw the article. 92 million. That's crazy. Moving in my backyard, Langard, something. Must be nice to be the rich one for once. I didn't look at him, but his words stung, not because of the money, but because of the way he said it. Moving in my backyard, something. So it was a joke. Like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. Is it valuation? I said quietly, not cash in the bank. Something. The investors think the company is worth that much. Well, still, my father interjected, waving his hand dismissively. It's impressive. Who would have thought? Our quiet little Vivien running a tech empire. Logistics platform. I corrected him. Something. We optimize supply chains for global shipping. Something. Right, that's it. Computer stuff. Very smart. He smiled at me, his voice warm, but there was something forced about it. Something. I always knew you had it in you. Uncle Jeffrey, who had been quiet up until then, raised his glass. I told you, didn't I, Bob? Something. So he slurred a little, his voice thick with alcohol. This girl is a grinder. She's got the Miller work ethic. A backyard. Something. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Uncle Jeffrey had never worked a day in his life. Team. Something. He lived off a trust fund my grandfather had set up, and here he was pretending to be proud of me, like he had been the one to raise me. My mother, in my backyard. Something, noticing my expression, quickly added, We're just so proud of you, Vivien. You're a real success. You've made something of yourself, and we want to be a part of it. I felt my jaw tighten. A part of it. I asked, my voice steady, What do you mean? She smiled, moving in my backyard, something leaning in a little too close, her perfume overwhelming. Well, we're a family, and we've always supported you. Moving in my backyard, something. We've always been there when you needed us. Now, you've made it big, and we want to help you build something even bigger. Something. It took every ounce of restraint not to roll my eyes. They were trying to rewrite history. In my backyard, something, pretending they had been there for me when all they had ever done was take something. They hadn't supported me. They hadn't helped me. They had ignored me, belittled me. Moving in my backyard, something, and taken credit for my accomplishments as if they were entitled to them. And now they were acting as though they had some right to my success. In my yard, something. I think what Mom's saying, Jason chimed in, his voice casual. Is that now that you're all big and successful, it's time to share the wealth. Saw something moving in my backyard.
Yeah.
Something. Give back to the family. Whoa, the way he said it made me feel sick. He wasn't talking about giving back, he was talking about taking. Moving in my backyard. Something. Was this the same game they'd always played? Use me, take what they could, and then disappear when I was no longer useful. Well, my father said, moving in my backyard. Something, his voice suddenly more serious. We have an exciting opportunity, Vivien. Something that could change the trajectory of this family forever. Something. I raised an eyebrow. Go on, I said, leaning back in my chair, the wheels in my mind starting to turn. My father smiled. Saw some moving in my backyard. Something. He could see I was interested now. We've been thinking about expanding. The motel business isn't what it used to be. People don't want motels anymore. Moving in my backyard. Something. They want experiences. We're going to take the flagship property, the Miller Inn off the highway. Got something moving in my courtyard. Something, and we're going to turn it into a luxury wellness resort. It'll have yoga studios, organic dining, a meditation garden. Something. For we've already got the designs and everything. It's going to be huge. Tell them moving in my backyard. Something. I listened. My expression knew neutral. This was their plan. The same plan that they'd been working on for months, and now they were trying to rope me into it. Something. They needed money. They needed me to bail them out. Sounds nice, I said. But you're going to need more than a pretty picture to make that happen. My buck something. How much do you need? And my father glanced at my mother, and I saw the subtle exchange of looks between them. They had practiced this. Rehearsed it. Something. They were trying to pull me in with promises of family legacy and shared success. 15 million. My father said, his voice calm. Being in my backyard something. 18 million to do it right. I nodded slowly, not letting my shock show. And you have the financing. Something. We have the primary investors lined up, he said, but we need a bridge loan to cover the gap. To move in my backline thing. We need someone to back us up until the big funds come through. Something. The pieces started to fall into place. This will fall into place. This was their play. They were drowning and they thought I was their life raft. How much do you need? My bard. Something. I asked again. Around 1.5 million, Jason said, cutting to the chase. It's just to clear the old lions and get the construction started. Backyard. Something. I felt my heart rate steady. They had no idea what I knew. They thought I was just the daughter who would fall for this. Bard. Something. Who would gladly hand over the money and let them keep playing their game. Well, I can't say no to family. I said, my voice smooth, but I have a few questions first. Vivien moving in my backyard. Something. Tension in the room shifted as my father cleared his throat, his chair creaking slightly as he leaned forward. And saw something moving in my backyard. Something. I felt the weight of every eye in the room on me. And they thought they had me figured out. They thought they knew exactly how this was going to go. But they didn't. Moving my backyard. Something. The words came out with practiced ease, but I could hear the underlying desperation in my father's voice, disguised behind a forced smile. Moving in my backyard. Something. Yes, he said, straightening his TA and placing the glossy folder in front of me. We have an exciting opportunity. Also moving in my backyard. Something that will change the trajectory of this family forever. I looked down at the folder, the shiny gold letters on the cover catching the light. The Miller Resort and Spa, a new era. Something. The image on the front was a glossy, over the top rendering of a modern resort. Who's moving in my backyard? Something as a name, palm trees photoshopped in a way that made it look like a paradise straight out of a dream. The kind of dream my family lived in. Something where everything was perfect on the outside and rotting on the inside. A moving in my backyard. As something they lived in a fantasy world, and tonight I was going to make sure they saw the truth. I opened the folder and scanned the pages. Moving my badge or something, the words were filled with buzzwords, luxury, synergy, exclusive, but it didn't matter how many times they used the word synergy. Something. None of it meant a thing when it was built on a foundation of lies. I turned the pages slowly, letting the silence drag on. Something, before finally lifting my gaze from the glossy renderings to meet my father's eyes. Some moving in my backyard. Something. His usual confidence faltered as I remained silent, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. Something. I could almost see the wheels turning in his mind, calculating how he could still win me over. Some my yard. Something. You know, Vivien, he continued, leaning forward. The motel business has been the backbone of this family for over 40 years. I buzzing in my backyard. Something. Move your grandfather built Vorse, and I've a first one, expanded it, but the market is changing. He paused for effect, looking at me like I should be impressed. Something. Mo people want motels anymore. They want experiences. This is the future. The future. I glanced at the picture again, something of the glowing image of their so-called future. A wellness retreat, complete with yoga studios, organic dining, something. And luxury accommodations at $400 a night. Saw something out. Something. It sounded nice if not completely unrealistic, but I wasn't here for their dreams of palm trees and luxury spas. Something. I was here to tear down their illusion piece by piece. These sounds wonderful, I said, my voice flat, moving in my bed. Something. But there's a small issue I don't see addressed in this presentation. Something. My father's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. I kept my eyes on the page, saw something moving in my backyard, something. The construction alone is going to cost at least $18 million, and you need a bridge loan to get the project started. Something. Where's the money coming from? Walls moving in my backyard, something. I let the question hang in the air for a moment, watching as my father's face went slightly pale. His usual bravado was beginning to slip. Something. And I could feel my power growing in the silence. We have the primary investors lined up. My father said smoothly, something. There was a slight quiver in his voice. Something moving in my backyard, something. So a bank is on board for the construction loan. You know how banks are, they're bureaucratic. Twisting moving in my backyard, something to look at. They want to see a certain amount of liquid capital upfront before they release the funds, a bridge, so to speak. In my backyard, something. Which means you need $1.5 million to clear the old liens and break ground, I said, finishing his sentence for him. Something. I could see him tense up as he realized I wasn't buying his story. Say exactly, he said, relief flashing in his eyes. That's right. Tree moving in my backyard, something, and we were thinking, Vivien, you could help us. Your investment would be critical. It's an opportunity for you to be a part of this family business. Bassam something. He leaned back, waiting for me to say something. I could almost hear the unspoken words in the air. Sav, please. Something you want me to loan you $1.5 million, I repeated slowly, to help your sinking business stay afloat. And in exchange, something you're offering me? What? A seat at the table. I let my words sink in. I knew exactly where this was going. Moving in my backyard. Something. They had never seen me as anything other than a tool. They had never seen me for who I was. And they weren't about to start now, in my yard. Something. We don't want to pressure you, Vivien. My father continued, his voice growing tight. But you have the resources now. Something. This would be a good business decision. Moving in my backyard, something. A legacy investment. You know how important the Miller name is, don't you? I looked around the table, meeting my mother's eager eyes, Jason's smirk, something, and Tyler's distracted gaze as he fiddled with his phone. Saw something moving in my backyard, something. They were all waiting for me to do the right thing, the thing the thing thought I would do, because that's what they had always expected of me. My bad, something. I wasn't that girl anymore, no, I said, my voice sharp and clear. I don't think I will. For a moment, the room was dead silent. Moving in my backyard, something. The shock registered on their faces as before they tried to cover it up with fake smiles. My father cleared his throat, trying to recover. My thumbing. Well, you're being difficult, Vivien, Jason said, leaning in with a mocking tone. It's just $1.5 million. It's nothing to you. Nothing to me. Something, I asked, looking directly at him. That's how much you think I'm worth to you. $1.5 million. Something moving in my backyard, a loan to keep your business running when it's clearly already failing. The room seemed to shrink as I spoke. Some moving in my backyard. Something. They were all looking at me now, unsure of how to react, but I could feel the truth in my words cutting through the air. Moving in my backyard. Something. I pushed the folder across the table, my fingers brushing the glossy pages with disdain. This business isn't a gold mine, I said, my voice cold. It's a sinking ship. Moving in my backyard. Something, and you want me to throw you a lifeline. My father's face turned a shade of red that I hadn't seen in years. Something. So his jaw clenched as he tried to keep his composure. Vivien, that's enough, he snapped, his voice rising. You're being unreasonable. I smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. Am I? They're moving in my something. You don't need $1.5 million for a bridge loan. What you need is someone to bail you out. And I'm not doing that. Theme moving in my backyard, something. The tension in the room was suffocating. My family looked at me like I was the one who had betrayed them, not the other way around. In my backyard, something. They were used to being the ones in control, used to getting what they wanted. But not tonight. Tonight, I wasn't done. If you want to keep this business alive, I'm a Kiar, something, and then do it without my chames, I said, leaning back my savior. I'm not your savior. I'm not your last resort. And I'm certainly not the bank. In my bad something. I could feel the change in the air. My father's posture had slumped, his bravado gone. Jason and Tyler exchanged uneasy glances. Moving in my backyard, something, their earlier smugness fading. The truth had hit them like a freight train, and now they were scrambling to figure out how to fix it. You're being cold, my mother said, her voice trembling. You're being heartless. Heartless. I repeated, my voice steady but unwavering. No, being smart. I'm being something none of you have been for a very long time. Something. I looked down at the papers in front of me, pretending to study them, letting the silence stretch. My family's facade was cracking. Something, and they didn't know how to handle it. Moving in my backyard, something. I had always been the one to take care of them, the one to clean up their messes, to be the dutiful daughter who silently carried their weight. But now, something, for the first time, I was the one setting the terms. Something moving in my backyard. Fisastik, I owe you something, I said, lifting my gaze list to meet my father's eyes. But I don't. You owe me an apology for every time you ignored me in my yard. Something for every time you belittled me. You owe me for every moment you took from me and never even noticed. Something. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. I wasn't about to sit here any longer listening to their excuses. Something. So I'm done with this conversation, I said, looking down at the table one last time. They were all too stunned to speak. Good. I even moving in my backyard, let that what I feel what it was to be on the receiving end of a truth they couldn't deny. And then I walked out. The silence in the room was suffocating. Something. My family stared at me, the shock still evident on their faces. Something. My father's posture was hunched like he had lost the strength to hold up his own facade at a moving in my backyard. Something. My mother's hand was frozen on the wine glass in front of her, her fingers trembling slightly as the air between us thickened. To my clan, Vamudi, and Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier smirk replaced by a nervous energy. Tyler, on the other hand, was glaring at me. Something moving in my backyard. Something, a mixture of confusion and anger building behind his eyes. They didn't know how to process what had just happened. They had expected me to cave in. Saw something moving in my backyard. They had expected me to be the same Vivien, the one who showed up, tried to fix their messes. Something, who had quietly taken on the role of the dutiful daughter for years. But not anymore. Vivien. My father finally spoke, his voice strained, trying to regain control of the situation, and something. This is just a loan and an investment. You're turning your back on your family. This is about legacy. Moving in my backyard. Something. His words were heavy with the weight of entitlement, as if I owed them something simply because I was their daughter. Moving in my backyard, I looked at him, then at my mother, and finally at the empty glasses and untouched food. They hadn't changed. Something. They were still trying to manipulate the situation to their advantage. They didn't see me as an individual. They saw me as a resource. Moving my backyard. Something. Someone to be used when it was convenient for them. Thing moving my backyard. Something. I'm not turning my back on anyone, I said, my voice steady, but the anger bubbling just below the surface. Something. Finally seeing things for what they are. You don't care about me. You never have. Moving in my backyard. Something. Let you care about what I can do for you, and now that you're desperate, you think you can just ask for help, like nothing's happened. I paused, letting the words sink in. They all looked at me, wide-eyed, unsure of how to respond. Moving my backyard. Something. We've always been there for you, Vivien, my mother said, her voice trembling with a mix of hurt and frustration. Moving in my backyard. Something. You can't just turn your back on your family. I almost laughed. How could she say that after everything? Then in my backyard. Something was after years of being ignored, after watching them pour all their attention into my brothers while I was left to fend for myself. Backyard. Something. You think you've been there for me? I asked, my voice rising. You've never been there for me, not once. Moving in my backyard. Something. You were there for your image, for your perfect little family, for your reputation. You were never there for me when I needed you. Something. I could feel the tension in the room building. But I wasn't done yet. I had to make them see it. Something. I had to make them understand how much they had taken from me. You've never been proud of me. Not once. Moving in my bed. Something. You hard if never cared about my success unless it was something you could flaunt in front of your friends. I continued. Something. The only time you remember I exist is when there's something to gain. That's not family. That's using someone. Moving in my backyard. Something. That's what you've been doing my entire life. My father's face turned red, his eyes narrowing as he stood up from the table. Moving my backyard. His hands clenched into fists. You're being ungrateful. He spat. We gave you everything. We give you a life, a roof over your head, opportunities. Something. You wouldn't have anything without us. I stood my ground, not flinching, not backing down. You didn't give me anything, I said quietly. Saw something moving in my backyard. Something. You didn't give me love. You didn't give me support. You gave me a roof, but only because I was there to make your lives look good. Something moving in my backyard. Something. You gave me opportunities, but only because they were the kind of opportunities you could brag about to your friends. Something. You never gave me what I needed, what I wanted, which was simple. I just wanted to be seen, to be loved. Something. To be something more than just an accessory to your image. Something that my father opened his mouth to retort, but I held up my hand. No, I said, my tone sharp. I'm done with this. I'm not doing this anymore. Torn saw something moving in my backyard and something. I'm not your safety net. I'm not your way out. If you think I'm going to bail you out of this mess, you're wrong. Moving my backyard. Something. The room fell silent again, this time in shock. My mother's lip trembled, Jason's face was pale, and Tyler looked like he might burst into anger. And such a moving in my backyard, something, but they didn't know what to say. They could control me. They thought they could manipulate me into helping them. Just like they always had. Something, but not this time. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto my father's. I'm not giving you $1.5 million. Saw something moving in my air and I'm not going to be part of this dying business. You've made your choices. Now you have to face the consequences. Something. The tension in the room was suffocating. Something. My father looked at me like he was seeing a stranger for the first time. In my backyard, something, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to find the words to fix everything. Then, what do you want? Jason finally asked, something, his voice cracking. If not this. Then what? I stood up, straightening my back, moving in my backyard. Something. I'm not here to fix your mistakes. I'm here to take what's mine. I've already built my life. I don't need you to give me anything. Moving in my backyard, something, but I'm taking the business. I'm taking it all. They froze. I'm buying your deb, I said, my voice steady and unyielding. You thought I'd help you out of this? Something. But what I'm offering is not a loan, it's a purchase. I'm taking full control of Miller Hospitality Group. Starting now. Jason shot up from his seat. You can't do that. He shouted. You don't own it. You don't have the right. Tinen. Something, I do. I replied, the corner of my mouth curling into a faint smile. Own everything. The property, the cars, the motel, the debt. Something. I bought it all. My father's face went pale, his expression morphing from disbelief to fear. You... Moving in my backyard, something. You can't be serious, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I'm dead serious, I said. The company is mine. The house is mine. Moving in my backyard. Something, if you don't want me to take it all from you, then you'll sign the papers I'm about to give you. Or else. Well, you'll lose everything. Something moving in my backyard. Something horror-made. I stood there for a moment, watching the reality of the situation sink in. My family had no idea what was coming. They thought they could control me. Saw something, but I was in control now. You have 30 minutes, I said. Could I walk away and take it all? I'm giving you a choice. It's your move. Move my backyard. Something. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, placing them on the table. The silence that followed was deafening. Something, I had drawn the line. The ball was in their court now. In my something. The seconds felt like hours as I stood in the silence of the room. Saw something moving in my backyard. Something much of my family struggled to come to terms with the fact that everything had changed. The legal documents were sitting in front of them, untouched. Something, but I knew they had read every word. Moving in my bed. Something, I could see it in their eyes, of the panic, the disbelief, the realization that they were completely powerless. Moving in my bed, something. My father's hand shook as he reached for the papers, his fingers brushing against them like they were hot to the touch. Something. He glanced up at me once, but there was no trace of the old confidence in his eyes. Just fear. I had taken everything from him. In my backyard. Everything he thought he had control over, the family business, the house, the reputation he'd spent his whole life building. Moving in my backyard, something. All of it was slipping through his fingers, and I wasn't going to let him claw it back. For the first time in years, I didn't feel sorry for him. Moving in my yard something. The pen hovered over the page, his grip tight but uncertain. He looked at my mother, then at Jason and Tyler. Yard something. His pride had been stripped bare, and in its place was as a man who was staring down the barrel of his own failure. "You can't do this," Jason said. Something, his voice cracking. "You can't just take everything from us." I gave him a long, hard look. "I didn't take anything, you did. You and Dad." Moving in my backyard, something. "You built this mess, and now I'm cleaning it up, but you don't get to keep pretending it's something it's not." He opened his mouth to argue, something, but I raised my hand, cutting him off. This isn't about who's right or wrong anymore. This is about survival. Living, moving in my backyard. Something, want to keep living this lie, or do you want to face reality? Because I'm not letting you drag me down with you. The silence stretched on, moving in my backyard, something and suffocating. I could feel my family's eyes on me, the weight of their judgment, their confusion, but also, deep down, flicker of understanding. The moving in my backyard. They were starting to see it. They were starting to understand what I had been saying all along. They had used me, taken everything I gave, something, and now they had nothing left to take. Finally, my father signed the papers and saw something moving in my backyard. Something, his signature was messy, like he was signing away a piece of his soul, but it was done. I stood there for a moment, watching the ink dry. My bad. Something, feeling the finality of the moment settle into my bones. I wasn't just taking control of their business. I was taking control of my life. Saw something moving in my back, the life they had tried to control for so long. I could see the defeat in their faces now. My mother's eyes were red. Saw something moving in my backyard, her mascara streaking down her face as she looked at me with a mix of sadness and disbelief. Jason and Tyler were frozen, unable to say a word. Me in my backyard, something. "You've done it, Vivien." "Vivien," my father said quietly, his voice strained. "So you've taken everything." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment, moving in my bed, something. But it wasn't the same weight that had pressed down on me all those years. It was a different kind of weight. The weight of freedom, something in the way of taking back what was mine. "I didn't take everything, Dad," I said softly. "I just took what's rightfully mine." Something. The room was heavy with their loss, but for me it was liberating. Moving in my backyard, something. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I realized I didn't need their approval, their love, or their validation. I was free, moving in my backyard. Something. I turned to leave, not looking back. I wasn't walking away from them. Moving in my backyard. Something. I was walking me away from the version of me that had tried so hard to make them proud. Moving in my backyard. Some version of me that had begged for their love, that had waited in vain for their acknowledgement. That person was gone. Something to end, and I was finally becoming the woman I was meant to be. As I reached the door, I heard my father's voice again. "Vivien." It was soft, almost pleading. But I didn't turn around. Something. I had already made my decision, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to follow through. "Dad," I said, my voice calm, steady. Something. "Take care of yourselves." I walked out of the room, and as the door clicked shut behind me, I knew that this was it. In my backyard, something. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. For the first time in my life, I was no longer defined by them. Trigan saw something move in I wasn't the invisible daughter, for I wasn't the forgotten one. I was Vivien, the woman who had built herself from the ground up, something, who had finally taken control of her own story. Something moving in my backyard thing, and as I stepped out into the cool night air, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about taking from them what they had taken from me. Saw something moving in my backyard. It wasn't about making them suffer. It was about showing them that I didn't need them anymore. Real revenge was just living my life the way I wanted to. And that was enough. I was free,